I was sitting alone on the front porch as the neighborhood woke up, wearing my teal tracksuit from when I used to walk every morning, when the banker called to say I needed to come in immediately. "There was an issue with a deposit," she said. "A large deposit." I thought it was a mistake. I had $89 in my account and an eviction notice taped to my door. I drove to the bank in Boston wearing the same tracksuit I'd slept in. My grandmother's cardigan wrapped around my shoulders because the heat in my apartment above the closed storefront barely worked. The banker asked me to sit down. She pulled up my account on her screen and turned it toward me. The number didn't make sense. I read it 3 times. She said, "Ma'am, are you aware this is a life-changing amount of money?" I started crying right there at her desk. $215,000. From land I didn't know existed. From a grandmother who died 5 years ago. From a protection that reached across death to catch me exactly when I was falling. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started, to the moment I understood what my own daughter was capable of. 30 minutes before my surgery, I was in the pre-op room at Mass General, floating in that strange space between awake and asleep. The first round of medication had started working. The nurses had left to prep the operating room. I was alone with my daughter and her boyfriend, a man I'd met twice and didn't trust. I kept my eyes closed because the fluorescent lights made my head swim and because I was scared. The surgery was supposed to fix the nerve damage in my spine. Without it, I'd eventually lose the ability to walk. With it, there was a 20% chance something could go wrong. I'd signed the consent forms that morning with shaking hands. The first time I met the boyfriend was at a coffee shop in Cambridge, 3 months before the surgery. My daughter brought him to what I thought would be a mother-daughter lunch. He wore expensive sneakers and a leather jacket that looked new, and he ordered the most expensive thing on the menu without looking at the price. When the bill came, he excused himself to take a phone call that lasted 20 minutes. My daughter paid. I watched her pull out a credit card I didn't recognize, watched her hands shake slightly as she signed the receipt. When I asked her about it later, she changed the subject. The second time was worse. They showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Tuesday evening. I'd just gotten home from a doctor's appointment where they'd explained that the nerve damage was progressing faster than expected. I was crying when they knocked. The boyfriend looked around my small apartment with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe, or calculation. He asked how much rent I paid, asked if I owned the place, asked if I had any assets. My daughter said he was just concerned about me. But I saw the way he looked at my grandmother's things, at the few pieces of jewelry she'd left me sitting in a dish by the sink. I should have trusted my instincts then. Should have asked my daughter to leave him outside. Should have asked why he needed to know about my financial situation. But I was so tired, and she seemed happy, and I didn't want to be the suspicious mother who drove her only child away with questions. I heard papers rustling, my daughter's voice, urgent and low. "We need to do this now, before she goes under completely." The boyfriend's voice, uncertain. "Are you sure she can't hear us?" My daughter again, sharper this time. "It doesn't matter. Just hold her hand steady so we can get her fingerprint on the document." I opened my eyes. She actually gasped. The boyfriend shoved papers into a canvas bag, but not before I saw the header. Last will and testament. My daughter tried to smile, her face doing that thing it does when she's lying, all stretched and bright. "Mom, you're awake. We were just organizing your insurance forms." But I'd seen it. The will she'd printed, already filled in. Everything to her. The boyfriend listed as co-executor. All it needed was my signature or thumbprint, and she'd been 30 minutes away from getting it while I was unconscious and helpless on a surgical table. In that moment, lying in that pre-op bed with medication making my thoughts swim, I understood something I'd been avoiding for months. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was planned. She'd chosen this day specifically. chosen the moment right before surgery when I'd be sedated, but not yet unconscious, when my defenses would be lowered, when she could claim I'd agreed to it if anyone questioned her later. The boyfriend wouldn't make eye contact with me. He just stood there clutching that canvas bag, and I could see the sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the room. My daughter kept talking, her words tumbling over each other, creating a wall of sound that I couldn't quite penetrate through the medication fog. Something about planning for the worst-case scenario, something about making sure everything was in order, something about protecting me. Protecting me. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. I pulled the IV out of my arm. The monitors started beeping. My daughter grabbed my shoulder. "Mom, what are you doing? You need this surgery." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. I said, "Get out." She started crying, saying I was confused from the medication, that I was misunderstanding. The boyfriend stood there holding the bag of papers like evidence he couldn't hide fast enough. The nurse who rushed in was a woman named Cheryl, with gray hair and tired eyes. She'd been the one to insert my IV earlier, had held my hand when I admitted I was scared. Now she took one look at my face and asked my daughter and her boyfriend to step outside. My daughter protested. Cheryl's voice got firm in a way that left no room for argument. I said outside, "Now." When they were gone, Cheryl looked at the blood dripping from where I'd pulled out the IV. She didn't scold me, just grabbed gauze and applied pressure, her movements gentle and practiced. "You want to tell me what happened?" she asked. I did. The words came out in a jumbled rush, and I wasn't sure if they made sense, but she listened to all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You want me to call security?" I hadn't considered that. Security, making it official, making it real. "I just want them gone," I said. "I just want to leave." The nurses rushed in. I told them I was canceling the surgery. They tried to convince me otherwise, explained the risks of waiting, but I was already pulling off the hospital gown. Dr. Chen, the surgeon who was supposed to operate, came in still wearing his surgical scrubs. He was a kind man in his 50s who'd explained the procedure to me twice, who'd answered every panicked question I'd had. He looked genuinely worried as he pulled up a chair beside my bed. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, "I understand you're upset, but this surgery is critical. The longer we wait, the more nerve damage you'll sustain. We're talking about permanent mobility loss if we don't address this soon." I believed him. I knew he was right. But the thought of going under anesthesia, of being completely vulnerable and unconscious while my daughter was anywhere in the building, made my chest feel like it was caving in. "I can't," I said. "Not today." He asked if something had happened. I didn't tell him. Couldn't find the words to explain that my own child had just tried to rob me. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay," he said, "but please, reschedule as soon as you're ready. This can't wait indefinitely." I walked out in socks and a gown that barely closed in the back. Called a cab from the lobby. Went back to my apartment in the quiet suburban street with modest homes and chain-link fences, the place I'd lived for 12 years, and locked the door. The cab driver was a woman named Rosa who'd immigrated from El Salvador 30 years ago. She saw me in the hospital gown and didn't ask questions, just cranked up the heat and handed me a blanket she kept in the front seat. "Bad day?" she asked. I nodded. She said, "Tomorrow's going to be better." I wanted to believe her. My daughter called 47 times that first day. I answered 0. I watched my phone light up over and over. The voicemails she left started apologetic and escalated to angry. The first one said, "Mom, please, let me explain. You don't understand what was happening." The 10th one said, "You're being completely irrational. The medication made you paranoid." The 47th one said, "Fine. When you're ready to be reasonable, You know how to reach me. I deleted them all without listening to them completely. Just heard enough to know they followed the same pattern. Her mistake became my misunderstanding. Her betrayal became my paranoia. Her guilt became my obligation to forgive. That was 8 months ago. 8 months of calls I didn't answer. 8 months of text messages I deleted without reading. 8 months of her showing up at my door until I stopped answering the buzzer. 8 months of living with the knowledge that my only child had tried to rob me blind while I was sedated and vulnerable. My sister called 2 days after the incident. My daughter had reached out to her, spinning some story about a misunderstanding, about medication-induced confusion, about her worried sick mother who'd canceled life-saving surgery over nothing. My sister knew me better than that. She came over with Thai food and wine and let me tell her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I never liked that boyfriend." It was such a simple statement, such a relief to be believed without question, that I started crying again. She helped me screen calls after that, helped me document the messages my daughter left, the times she showed up at my apartment, the escalating pattern of her attempts to contact me. "Just in case," my sister said. "Just in case this gets worse." I didn't ask what worse looked like. I didn't want to know. Canceling the surgery was the right choice for my soul, but it destroyed my body. The nerve damage got worse. I couldn't stand for more than 20 minutes without my legs going numb. Couldn't work my job at the department store. Couldn't pay my rent. The medical bills from the pre-op work and the canceled surgery mounted into towers of paper that I kept in a box by the door because I couldn't look at them. The department store let me go 3 weeks after I canceled the surgery. They were kind about it, offered disability paperwork and references, but the end result was the same. I couldn't stand for 8-hour shifts anymore. Couldn't help customers carry purchases to their cars. Couldn't do the job I'd done for 7 years. My manager, a woman named Patricia who'd always been fair, looked genuinely sad when she handed me my final paycheck. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish there was something else we could do." I believed her. But belief doesn't pay bills. I applied for disability and was denied. The letter said I didn't have sufficient documentation of my condition's impact on my ability to work, never mind that my doctor had written a 3-page letter explaining the nerve damage, never mind that I had 8 months of medical records showing the deterioration. The system decided I wasn't disabled enough, and there was nothing I could do about it except appeal and wait and hope. I lost my apartment 4 months after the surgery incident. Not all at once, but in that slow, terrible way where you stop being able to afford things piece by piece. First the car payment, then the electricity got shut off twice before I gave up and just used candles. Then the landlord started the eviction process and I didn't fight it because what was the point? I moved to this place above a closed storefront on a busy street in Boston. Winter came early that year, and the cold kept me inside. The windows fogged up from what little warmth the radiator produced, and I'd sit in my grandmother's cardigan and wonder how much longer I could survive. The storefront apartment was the cheapest place I could find that didn't require first and last month's rent. The landlord was a man named Frank who owned a bodega 3 blocks away. He showed me the place on a gray November afternoon, apologizing for the broken window in the bedroom that he'd covered with plastic, for the radiator that only worked intermittently, for the sound of traffic that never stopped. "It's not much," he said, "but it's clean and it's legal, and the roof doesn't leak." The bar was so low and I was so desperate that I signed the lease right there. Moving day was just me and my sister loading boxes into her Honda Civic. We made 6 trips. Each time we climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment, my legs screamed at me. By the 3rd trip, I had to sit down for 20 minutes before I could continue. My sister didn't comment, just kept hauling boxes while I rested. But I saw the worry in her eyes, saw the way she watched me struggle, and I hated being the burden I'd become. Maybe you've been there. That place where you're still breathing but you're not sure why. Where the future looks like nothing but more loss and more pain. If you have, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I hope you never do. The storefront below my apartment had been a laundromat once. You could still see the ghost of the sign, the outline of letters that spelled suds and duds, visible when the afternoon sun hit it right. Sometimes I'd stand at the window and look down at the empty space and wonder what it felt like when it was full of people and purpose. Now it was just dark windows and a locked door, and the accumulation of trash that collects in doorways when no one cares enough to clean it. My grandmother raised me when my parents couldn't. It's complicated but loving, the way they say it is with family that actually shows up. My mother was 17 when she had me, still a child herself, and my father was gone before I was born. My grandmother worked as a hotel maid at the Marriott downtown, took the bus every day in her white uniform, came home smelling like bleach and other people's lives. She raised me in a rent-controlled studio in Dorchester where the radiator clanked all night and the neighbors fought loud enough to hear every word. That studio was smaller than the storefront apartment, but somehow it felt bigger because it was full of life. My grandmother had plants on every windowsill, African violets that bloomed purple and pink despite the limited light. She had a collection of ceramic angels that she'd bought from thrift stores, each one unique and slightly damaged. She said broken things were still beautiful. She said broken things still had purpose. We argued often. She had rules about everything. About how to speak and how to sit and how to be grateful for what we had even when what we had was almost nothing. I chafed against those rules as a teenager, rolled my eyes at her insistence that I write thank you notes and keep my elbows off the table and speak properly. I thought she was old-fashioned and out of touch. I thought the rules were pointless. Now I understand. She was teaching me dignity. Teaching me that poverty didn't mean we had to be poor in spirit. Teaching me that how you carry yourself matters, especially when the world wants to treat you as less than. Every thank you note was a lesson in gratitude. Every straight spine at the dinner table was a lesson in self-respect. Every properly pronounced word was a shield against people who would judge us for where we came from. But we always found our way back to each other. At night, she'd take off her work shoes and soak her feet in a plastic tub while I did my homework at the kitchen table. She'd ask me what I learned that day and actually listen to the answer. When I graduated high school, she wore her church dress and cried in the audience. When I got pregnant with my daughter at 22, she held my hand through the labor and didn't say I told you so, even though she'd told me so. I remember the day I told her I was pregnant. I was terrified. The father was already gone, and I was working part-time at a convenience store and taking classes at community college. I thought she'd be disappointed. Instead, she sat me down at that kitchen table and said, "Babies are a blessing. Even when the timing is hard, we'll figure it out." And we did. She watched my daughter while I finished my degree. She taught me how to be a mother because I'd never had one of my own. That's what makes what my daughter did so much worse. She knew what her great-grandmother sacrificed. She grew up hearing stories about the studio apartment, about the bus rides, about the hotel maid who built a life out of nothing. She knew, and she still tried to take everything. She died 5 years ago. Long enough that I can smile at memories instead of cry most days. But some days the grief still hits like winter wind through a cracked window. She had nothing when she died. Lived in that same studio for 40 years. Took that same bus. Worked until her body gave out at 78. At her funeral, I wore her cardigan sweater and felt like an orphan even at 55 years old. The funeral was small. A few people from her church. Some former co-workers from the hotel, neighbors from the building who'd known her for decades. Pastor Ruth gave the eulogy, talked about my grandmother's faith and service and quiet strength. She told a story I'd never heard about my grandmother volunteering at a shelter every Thanksgiving, cooking turkeys and serving meals to people who had even less than we did. I cried through the whole service, my daughter holding my hand, both of us wearing black dresses we'd bought at Target the day before. My daughter gave a speech at the funeral, talked about her great-grandmother's love and wisdom, talked about feeling blessed to have known her, talked about carrying her legacy forward. Everyone said it was beautiful. I was so proud of her that day, proud of the woman she'd become, grateful that my grandmother had lived long enough to see her great-granddaughter graduate college and start her career. 3 years later, that same granddaughter would try to rob me while I was sedated. I think about that sometimes, about the disconnect between the woman who cried at the funeral and the woman who brought forged documents to a pre-op room. I don't understand how both people exist in the same body. The cardigan still smells like her. I press it to my face sometimes when the loneliness gets too heavy, and I swear I can smell the soap she used, and the coffee she drank, and something else that was just her. I'll never wash it. I can't. It's a teal cardigan, hand-knit, probably 40 years old. The elbows are worn thin, and one button is missing, and the hem is starting to unravel. My sister offered to mend it for me once. I said no. It's perfect exactly as it is, broken and beautiful, just like my grandmother said things could be. After the funeral, I went through her things in that tiny studio. There wasn't much. Clothes I donated to Goodwill. Photographs I kept in a shoebox. A hymnal from her mother's funeral that I took even though I don't go to church anymore. She left me a letter, handwritten on yellow legal paper, telling me I was stronger than I believed. That was it. No money. No property. Nothing that could save me when my world fell apart. The letter is 3 pages long. I've read it so many times that the creases are wearing thin, threatening to tear the paper into pieces. She wrote about her life, about her regrets and her joys. She wrote about raising me, about watching me become a mother myself. She wrote about pride and hope and love that transcends death. The last line says, "You are always going to be okay, baby girl. You just don't know it yet." I thought it was just words. Beautiful words, comforting words, but just words nonetheless. I didn't know she'd backed them up with action. Didn't know she'd spent 40 years making sure those words were true. I stopped praying after she died. Not in an angry way, just in a tired way. What was the point? I had the hymnal on my bookshelf, but I never opened it. Pastor Ruth from the church my grandmother attended kept calling for the first year, inviting me to services, to grief groups, to coffee. I always said no. I didn't want to sit in a room of strangers and talk about loss. I wanted my grandmother back, and since I couldn't have that, I wanted nothing. Pastor Ruth never gave up, though. She'd call every month, leave voicemails that were brief and kind. "Just checking in, no need to call back. You know where to find me when you're ready." It took 5 years for me to be ready. 5 years and a betrayal and a canceled surgery and a slow descent into poverty before I finally called her back. By month 6 in the storefront apartment, I had $89 in my bank account. The surgery I needed now cost 3 times what it did when I canceled it 8 months earlier. I was being evicted in 2 weeks. I'd applied for disability and been denied, applied for help from the state and been put on a waiting list. I made macaroni and cheese from a box and baked it golden on top the way my grandmother used to, but I couldn't eat it. The food sat on my table for 3 days before I threw it away. I remember making that macaroni and cheese on a Wednesday evening. It was one of the last things I had in the cupboard, a box I'd been saving because it was my grandmother's specialty. She'd add extra butter and a sprinkle of paprika and bake it until the top got crispy. I followed her recipe exactly, even though I could barely afford to run the oven. The smell filled the apartment, and for a moment I was back in her kitchen, watching her cook, feeling safe. But when I sat down to eat it, I couldn't swallow. The taste was right, but everything else was wrong. I was alone in a freezing apartment, facing eviction, unable to walk without pain, abandoned by my only child. The macaroni might as well have been sawdust. I put it in the refrigerator, thinking maybe tomorrow I'd have an appetite. Tomorrow became the next day, became the next day. By the time I threw it away, it had started to mold. The neighborhood outside my window felt hostile. Boston in winter is beautiful if you have somewhere warm to be. But when you're watching your life collapse, the snow just looks like more weight on top of everything else. People walked past my building in their wool coats and good boots, and I watched from behind fogged-up windows in my teal tracksuit, wondering if any of them could see me or if I'd already become invisible. There was a coffee shop across the street where people lined up every morning for expensive lattes. I'd watch them through my window, see them laughing and checking their phones and complaining about the cold in that performative way people do, when cold is just an inconvenience and not a threat. I wanted to hate them, but I just felt hollow. They were living in a different world than me, a world where money for coffee existed, where jobs existed, where futures existed. Sometimes someone would look up at my window. I'd step back, afraid they could see me watching them, ashamed of what they might see if they looked closely. A woman in her 50s wearing the same tracksuit for days, sitting in the dark because electricity costs money, watching other people live the life she used to have. I couldn't sleep. The pain in my spine kept me awake most nights, and when I did sleep, I dreamed about the pre-op room, about my daughter's hands reaching for mine, about waking up just in time. In the dreams, I didn't wake up. In the dreams, I signed the papers, and when I came out of anesthesia, everything was gone. The worst dreams were the ones where I woke up from surgery and she was there, smiling, holding my hand. In these dreams, she'd successfully forged my signature, and I didn't know it yet. She'd comfort me through recovery, help me home, make sure I was settled. And then, slowly, I'd start to notice things missing. Bank statements showing withdrawals I didn't make. Bills in my name for things I didn't buy. My apartment listed for sale without my knowledge. In the dreams, I'd confront her, and she'd cry and apologize and say it was for my own good. She'd say I wasn't capable of managing my own affairs. She'd say she was protecting me. And in the dreams, I'd believe her because the medication was still in my system and I was still weak from surgery and I couldn't trust my own mind anymore. I'd wake from these dreams gasping, my heart pounding, reaching for my phone to check my bank account. $89. Still $89. She hadn't gotten access. I'd stopped her in time. But the relief only lasted until the next night, when the dreams would start again. 2 weeks before eviction, I got the notice from the storage facility. I'd been keeping a unit there since I moved out of my real apartment, just a 5x5 space crammed with boxes I couldn't fit in the storefront place. The notice said I hadn't paid in 3 months. I had 1 week to clear it out or they'd auction everything inside. I didn't have anything valuable in there. Old tax returns. My daughter's baby clothes that I'd kept meaning to give to her before everything happened. Some of my grandmother's things I hadn't been able to part with. But I went anyway, on a Tuesday morning when my legs were having a good day, because what else was I going to do? The storage facility was in Dorchester, not far from where my grandmother's studio had been. I took the bus because I didn't have a car anymore, sat in the back with my head against the cold window and watched the city go by. It was the middle of winter, when the cold keeps you inside, and the streets looked gray and tired. The bus route took me past the old studio building. I hadn't been by there in years, had avoided it because seeing it hurt too much. But here I was, watching it slide past the window. The building looked smaller than I remembered, more rundown. The bodega on the first floor had become a cell phone store. The stoop where my grandmother used to sit on summer evenings was cracked and littered with cigarette butts. But the windows of what had been our studio had plants in them. Someone else's plants. Someone else's life. But still. It made me inexplicably happy to see those plants, to know that someone was living there and trying to make it beautiful despite everything. My grandmother would have liked that. The unit was exactly as depressing as I remembered. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, most of them labeled in my grandmother's handwriting because she'd helped me pack them years ago when I moved apartments. I started going through them one by one, sorting things into keep and trash piles, though honestly everything felt like trash at that point. The first box I opened was labeled Kitchen Fragile. Inside were dishes I'd packed away when I downsized, plates and bowls that had been wedding gifts from my short-lived marriage. I'd kept them for 30 years, moving them from apartment to apartment, never using them but unable to let them go. Now I looked at them and felt nothing. I put the whole box in the trash pile. The second box was my daughter's baby clothes. I pulled out a tiny yellow dress with ducks on it, remembered her wearing it when she was 6 months old. She'd hated that dress, cried every time I put it on her, but she looked so perfect in it that I'd taken a dozen photos. I'd planned to give her these clothes when she had children of her own. Now I folded the dress carefully and put it back in the box. I couldn't throw it away, but I couldn't keep it either. I left it in the unit for the auction. In a box marked Important Papers, I found the shoebox of old tax returns. My grandmother had been meticulous about keeping records. 7 years of returns, bundled with rubber bands. I was about to throw the whole thing away when I noticed something underneath the bundles. An envelope, yellowed and folded into quarters. I pulled it out. It was an insurance policy, or at least that's what the paper on top said. But underneath the insurance paperwork was another document. A property deed. Land in New Hampshire, 14 acres, with a small house. Purchased 40 years ago. Paid in full. Beneficiary, my name. I sat down on the concrete floor of that storage unit and read the deed 3 times. It didn't make sense. My grandmother had nothing. She rode the bus. She lived in a studio. She worked as a maid until her body gave out. Where would she get money to buy land? Why wouldn't she tell me? The purchase date was 1984. I would have been 13 years old. I tried to remember that year, tried to recall anything unusual. Had she suddenly had money? Had she taken a trip? Had she mentioned New Hampshire? I couldn't remember anything out of the ordinary. Just the same life we'd always lived, the same bus rides in the same studio and the same careful budgeting to make it to the end of the month. 40 years. She'd kept this secret for 40 years. Visited twice a year and never mentioned it. Paid taxes on property I didn't know existed. Maintained a house for a future she'd never see. The magnitude of that kind of planning, that kind of faith in my future need, made my chest ache. I called the town clerk's office in the New Hampshire county listed on the deed. The woman who answered sounded bored until I gave her the property number. Then her voice changed. "Oh, yes, the Henderson property. Are you family?" I told her I was the beneficiary. She said, "Your grandmother was a wonderful woman. She used to visit twice a year like clockwork. We all wondered what would happen to the place after she passed." I asked what she meant by twice a year like clockwork. The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret, said my grandmother would come up every May and October, would stay for a weekend, would check on the house and pay the property taxes in person, even though she could have mailed them. "She'd stop by the office and chat with us," Margaret said. "Bring cookies sometimes. She talked about you all the time. Said she was keeping the place nice for when you needed it." When you needed it, not if. When. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known. I drove there the next day, borrowed money I didn't have for a rental car, and drove 2 hours north into New Hampshire. The address led me to a dirt road outside a small town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and strangers are noticed. The house sat back from the road, small but solid, with a covered porch and windows that still had glass. It was winterized and locked. The drive up was surreal. I watched the city fall away, watched Boston become suburbs, become small towns, become country. The highway gave way to state routes, gave way to the dirt road that led to the house. Snow covered everything. pristine and untouched except for deer tracks and the occasional path made by snowmobiles. I almost missed the driveway. It wasn't marked, just a gap in the trees that could have been anything. But the GPS said this was it, so I turned. The car bumped over frozen ruts, and I held my breath, afraid I'd get stuck. But then the house came into view, and I forgot to breathe for a different reason. It looked like something from a postcard, small and white with green shutters, smoke-free chimney rising from the roof. Porch wrapped around the front. Snow covered the roof and piled against the foundation, but someone had clearly maintained the place. The shutters weren't crooked, the porch wasn't sagging, the whole structure looked sound and cared for. A man came out of the house next door, older, wearing a flannel jacket and work boots. He introduced himself as Tom, said he'd been the neighbor for 30 years. "You must be the granddaughter," he said. "She talked about you every time she came up." Tom invited me in for coffee while he told me about my grandmother's visits, how she'd arrive on Friday evening and leave Sunday afternoon, how she'd spend Saturday cleaning the house from top to bottom even though it didn't need it, how she'd sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sunset, how she always stopped by his house before she left to bring him cookies and catch up. "She was a private person," Tom said. "Never talked about her life in Boston much, but she'd light up when she talked about you. Showed me pictures of your daughter when she was young. Said she was blessed to have family." I asked him if he knew why she bought the property. He said, "She told me once that she grew up in foster care, bounced around Massachusetts her whole childhood, said she'd always dreamed of having a place that nobody could take away. She bought this place with money she'd been saving since she was 20 years old. Took her until she was 38 to save enough, but she did it. 38, the same age I was when my daughter was born. She'd been saving money for 18 years, probably a few dollars at a time from her maid's salary, probably going without things she needed to put money aside. And she'd done it all so that someday, decades in the future, her granddaughter would have a safety net." I didn't know what to say. Tom seemed to understand. He just refilled my coffee and told me the key was under the third porch step, exactly where Tom said it would be. I unlocked the door with shaking hands. Inside was clean, simply furnished, frozen in time. And taped to the kitchen counter was a note in my grandmother's handwriting. "For when you need it most. Sell it or live in it. Your choice. You were always going to be okay." I sat on the kitchen floor and cried until I couldn't breathe. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known I'd need this. That there would come a day when I had nothing and nowhere to go. She'd protected me from 40 years in the future. Saved money from a job that barely paid enough to survive. Bought this place and kept it secret and waiting. The house was simple inside. A living room with a wood stove and comfortable furniture. A kitchen with old appliances that still worked. 2 bedrooms upstairs with quilts on the beds. A bathroom with a clawfoot tub. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, but everything solid and real and mine. I walked through every room, touching everything, trying to feel my grandmother's presence. I found more notes. One in the bedroom drawer. "The mattress is new as of 2015. Sleep well." One in the kitchen cupboard. "The mugs are from that shop in Portsmouth you liked when you were little. I've been replacing them when they chip." One in the living room tucked into a book. "I hope you find peace here." She'd been preparing this place for me for 40 years. Thinking about what I'd need, what would comfort me, what would help me start over. Every detail was intentional, every choice made with love. And I'd had no idea any of it existed until I was sitting on the floor of a storage unit, about to throw away a box of tax returns. I listed the house and land for sale that week through a realtor Tom recommended. The market in that area was hot, he said. People from Boston buying up property for weekend places. He was right. I had 3 offers in 4 days. I accepted the highest one. $215,000. The price of a new life I never thought possible. That's how I ended up in the bank, crying at the banker's desk, while she asked me to sit down before showing me the account balance. When the check cleared, I just sat there staring at the number. The banker, a young woman named Maria with kind eyes, asked if I was okay. I told her I'd been evicted from my grandmother's grave and caught by her arms. Maria helped me set up accounts, explained my options, connected me with resources. She treated me like a person instead of a number, never made me feel stupid for not understanding financial terms. When we finished, she shook my hand and said, "Your grandmother sounds like she was an amazing woman." I said, "She was. Have you ever been saved by someone who isn't alive anymore? If you have, you know what I'm trying to say. If you haven't, I don't know if I can explain it. It's grief and gratitude so tangled together, you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. It's knowing you were loved in a way that transcended death. It's being held by hands you can't see." I paid off every medical bill that day, scheduled the surgery I'd needed for 8 months, found a financial advisor through Pastor Ruth, who I finally called back after a year of silence. The advisor helped me understand what I had, helped me make a plan. I wasn't rich, but I was safe. For the first time in 8 months, I could breathe without feeling like I was drowning. My daughter found out somehow. Maybe she'd been monitoring my credit, or maybe word just travels in ways I don't understand. She showed up at the storefront apartment on a Saturday morning, her face already arranged in apology. The boyfriend wasn't with her. She was alone, crying before she even opened her mouth. "Mom," she said, "I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking clearly. He pressured me. I never stopped loving you." I stood in the doorway and looked at her, my only child, the baby I'd raised alone after her father left, the girl I'd read to every night and driven to soccer practice and college orientation, the woman who'd tried to steal from me while I was sedated and helpless. She kept talking about how she'd been desperate, about how the boyfriend had debts she didn't know about how she'd panicked, about how she'd tried to call, tried to explain, tried to fix it, about how she'd never meant to hurt me. I noticed things as she talked. She'd lost weight. Her clothes were expensive but wrinkled like she'd slept in them. Her hands shook slightly. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than just lack of sleep. Part of me, the mother part that never fully shuts off, wanted to ask if she was okay, wanted to invite her in and make her tea and let her explain. But then I remembered her voice in the pre-op room. "Just hold her hand steady so we can get her fingerprint on the document." I remembered the will she'd printed, my entire life signed away to her. I remembered 8 months of calls I'd ignored, 8 months of her treating my justified anger as unreasonable paranoia. I didn't say anything, just looked at her until she ran out of words. Then I closed the door while she was still standing there. I heard her crying through the wood, heard her knock and call my name, heard her footsteps finally retreat down the stairs. After she left, I sat on the floor with my back against the door and let myself cry. Not for her, but for the relationship we'd had. For the mother and daughter we used to be before everything broke. For the grandmother who'd never know that the great-granddaughter she'd been so proud of had tried to rob me blind. They never acknowledged what they did, and I never gave them the chance. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some betrayals cut too deep for sorry to reach. Pastor Ruth came by that evening without calling first. She had soup and bread and the good sense not to ask questions. We sat at my kitchen table, the one I was about to leave behind, and she just let me exist in the silence. Finally, she said, "You don't have to forgive her." I started crying again. She said, "Everyone will tell you that you do. That family is family, that she's your daughter. But you don't have to forgive someone who tried to rob you blind. You're allowed to protect yourself." That permission meant everything. Every other person I'd told the story to had eventually circled back to forgiveness. She's your only daughter. Life's too short to hold grudges. She made a mistake, as if what she did was equivalent to forgetting my birthday or saying something thoughtless, as if attempted theft and betrayal was just a mistake anyone could make. But Pastor Ruth understood. She'd worked with abuse victims, had seen what family members were capable of doing to each other. She knew that forgiveness without accountability is just permission for the abuse to continue. She knew that some relationships aren't worth saving. She connected me with the financial advisor, helped me start looking at houses near my sister in a town outside Boston, sat with me while I signed papers and made phone calls and built a life out of the ashes. She never told me to pray or come to church or have faith. She just showed up. That's what faith leaders should do. Show up and shut up and be present in the hard parts. I started looking at houses the next week. Small places, nothing fancy, but mine. My sister came with me to viewings, pointed out things I missed, talked me out of fixer-uppers I didn't have the energy for. We found a place 2 streets away from her house, small, 2 bedrooms, with a porch where we could drink coffee in the morning and watch the neighborhood wake up together. The house was a 1960s ranch with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that hadn't been updated since 1985. But it had good bones, the inspector said. New roof, solid foundation, updated electrical. The backyard was small but fenced, with an apple tree that the previous owner said produced fruit every fall. The price was within my budget with enough left over for furnishing and emergency savings. I made an offer the same day we saw it. The seller accepted. We closed 3 weeks later, and I signed my name on papers that made me a homeowner for the first time in my life. At 60 years old, I finally had something that was truly mine, something nobody could evict me from, something my grandmother's love had made possible. The surgery happened 3 weeks later. Successful, no complications. I woke up with feeling in my legs and hope in my chest. The recovery was slow, but I had time now, had space to heal, had a place to go when I was released. This surgery was different from the canceled one in every way. Different hospital, different surgeon, different anesthesiologist. I didn't tell my daughter it was happening. Didn't tell anyone except my sister and Pastor Ruth. My sister stayed with me the whole time, was there when I woke up, held my hand through the pain of recovery. The surgeon, Dr. Patel, was a woman in her 40s who'd reviewed my case thoroughly. She explained everything 3 times, answered every question, never made me feel rushed or stupid. When I told her I was nervous about anesthesia, she introduced me to the anesthesiologist who'd be in the operating room. He was a kind man named Dr. Rodriguez who promised he'd talk me through every step, promised I'd be safe, promised I'd wake up whole. And I did. Woke up crying because the first thing I felt was my toes. Could wiggle them, could feel the blanket on my legs, could sense everything the nerve damage had been stealing from me. Dr. Patel came by during recovery and smiled when she saw me moving my feet. "Excellent," she said. "Exactly what we wanted to see." I moved into the new house on a Saturday in early spring. Boston was coming back to life after winter, and I felt like I was too. My sister helped me unpack. Pastor Ruth brought food. Tom, the neighbor from New Hampshire, sent a card that said, "Your grandmother would be proud." Moving day was chaos in the best way. My sister had recruited her husband and their 2 adult sons to help. We had a truck full of my belongings, plus furniture I'd bought specifically for the new house. Real furniture, not the secondhand pieces I'd been making do with. A couch that didn't sag, a kitchen table that didn't wobble, a bed with a real mattress instead of the futon I'd been sleeping on. The neighbors came by to introduce themselves, an elderly couple on one side who brought cookies, a young family on the other side whose kids wanted to show me the frog they'd caught in their backyard, the woman across the street who invited me to join the neighborhood book club. It felt like belonging, like community, like all the things I'd been missing while I watched the world from behind fogged-up windows. I kept the cardigan. It hangs in my closet now, still unwashed, still smelling like her. Sometimes I take it out and hold it and tell her thank you. Tell her I made it. Tell her she saved me. I honor her now in the way she would have wanted. Every year at Christmas, I buy gifts for children in foster care. Nice things, not charity things. The kind of gifts that make a kid feel seen. I do it because my grandmother was in foster care as a child, because I was raised by someone who knew what it meant to be abandoned, because she spent 40 years protecting me even after she was gone, and the least I can do is extend that protection to someone else. The first year, I bought gifts for 10 kids, worked with a local organization that matched me with children based on their ages and interests, a skateboard for a 12-year-old boy, an art set for a 10-year-old girl who wanted to be an illustrator, books and clothes and toys chosen specifically for each child. The organization sent me thank you notes that some of the kids had written. One said, "This is the best Christmas I ever had." I cried reading it, thinking about my grandmother, about the chain of love that extends through generations. My daughter tried to reach out twice more, once through my sister, once through a letter. The letter said she was in therapy, working on herself, hoping we could rebuild. I didn't respond. My sister asked if I was sure. I said I was. Some people protect you even from the grave. Some people try to rob you while you're unconscious on an operating table. The difference matters. I've learned some things in the year since my grandmother saved me from beyond death. About manipulation. About tactics. About the ways people use your vulnerability against you. They wait until you're weak. That's the first thing. My daughter didn't try this when I was healthy and employed. She waited until I was medicated and scared and about to go into surgery. Manipulators watch for your breaking points and strike when you're least able to defend yourself. They use your love as a weapon. She knew I loved her, knew I'd raised her alone, knew I'd sacrifice anything for her. She used that history as camouflage, betting that I'd never suspect my own daughter of trying to rob me. They bring witnesses to make it look legitimate. The boyfriend was there to hold my hand steady, to make it look like a normal thing, a daughter helping her mother with paperwork before surgery. If I hadn't woken up, if I'd just felt the pen in my hand in my drugged state and signed, who would have questioned it? They count on your shame to keep you quiet. After I walked out of the hospital, I didn't tell anyone for 2 weeks. Not my sister, not Pastor Ruth, not anyone. Because admitting your own child tried to steal from you while you were helpless feels like admitting you failed as a parent. The shame almost worked. Studies indicate that 21% of Latino seniors experienced multiple types of abuse. I'm not Latina, but the statistic haunts me. 1 in 5. In nursing homes, almost 1 in 6 residents reports experiencing abuse. These aren't random crimes by strangers. This is family, caregivers, people who are supposed to protect us. If you're listening to this and you recognize any of these tactics, here's what I want you to know. Document everything. I wish I'd taken a photo of that while she tried to make me sign. I wish I'd recorded her voice saying those words. You think you'll remember, but trauma makes memory unreliable. Write it down. Take pictures. Save texts and emails. Tell someone you trust. Not everyone, because some people will tell you to forgive or that you must be misunderstanding. But find one person who will believe you and tell them everything. For me, that was Pastor Ruth. She never doubted me. She never suggested I was confused or being dramatic. She just believed me and helped me move forward. Protect your documents. I got lucky because I walked out before my daughter could finish. But if you're vulnerable, if you're going into surgery or dealing with illness, give your important papers to someone you absolutely trust. Not family automatically. Trust. And know this. You're allowed to cut people off. Even family. Even your children. Forgiveness is not mandatory. Protection is not selfish. You are allowed to build a life that feels safe, and if that means certain people aren't in it, that's okay. I think about my grandmother every day, about the sacrifice of saving money from a job that barely paid enough to survive, about visiting that house twice a year for 40 years, keeping it clean and maintained and ready, about the note she left on the counter, knowing exactly what I'd need to hear when I found it. She died 5 years ago, but she saved my life 8 months ago. That's what love does. Real love. The kind that doesn't need you alive to keep working. The kind that plans ahead and protects from the future and catches you when you fall, even when the hands doing the catching have been buried for years. I sit on my porch now in the mornings, in my new house near my sister. The neighborhood is quiet. There are modest homes and chain-link fences and people who wave when they walk their dogs. I wear my teal tracksuit sometimes, the one from when I used to walk every morning, and I'm starting to walk again. Short distances at first, building strength in my legs that the surgery gave back. The cardigan is inside on my bed. I still press it to my face when the loneliness hits. Still smell the soap and coffee and something that was just her. Some mornings my sister comes over and we drink coffee on the porch and talk about nothing. Some mornings I sit alone and watch the sunrise and feel grateful in a way that hurts. My daughter's number is still blocked. She's tried calling from other phones. I don't answer. She sent a card on my birthday last month. I didn't open it. My sister thinks maybe eventually I'll soften. Maybe I will. But not yet. Not while the memory of her voice saying, "Just hold her hand steady," still wakes me up at night. I'm 60 years old. I'm alive. I have a home and medical care and enough money to not be scared every day. I have my sister 2 streets away, and Pastor Ruth checking in, and Tom in New Hampshire sending cards about ice fishing. I have mornings on the porch and the strength returning to my legs and the cardigan that smells like the woman who saved me. I have a future I never thought I'd see. And I have the knowledge that I was loved by someone who knew me well enough to know I'd need saving. Who trusted me enough to leave me a choice, sell it or live in it. Your choice. You were always going to be okay. She was right. I am okay. More than okay. I'm building something. Every Christmas when I buy gifts for kids in foster care, I'm building. Every morning when I wake up without panic, I'm building. Every time I look at her cardigan and feel grateful instead of just grief, I'm building. The inheritance wasn't really the money. The money helped. Absolutely, it saved my life in practical terms. But the real inheritance was knowing I was loved. Knowing someone saw me clearly enough to understand I'd need protection. Knowing that protection would outlive her body and reach me exactly when I'd run out of rope. Some people will tell you blood is thicker than water. They'll say family is everything. They'll say you have to forgive. But I'm here to tell you that the people who protect you matter more than the people who share your DNA. My daughter shared my blood and tried to rob me. My grandmother shared my blood and saved me from beyond the grave. The difference isn't biology. It's love. Real love. The kind that plans ahead. So, where are you listening from? What's your story? Have you been protected by someone who isn't here anymore? Have you had to cut off family to save yourself? Drop a comment and let me know. This stuff matters. Your story matters. If this resonated with you, if you've felt this kind of betrayal or this kind of salvation, hit like. Subscribe for more stories about survival and family and the complicated truth of love, because these stories need to be told. The happy ending narratives and the messy middle parts and the truth that sometimes the dead protect us better than the living. I'm sitting on my porch. The sun is coming up over Boston. My sister will be here soon with coffee. Pastor Ruth is coming by later to talk about the foster care gift program for next Christmas. My legs are getting stronger. My grandmother's cardigan is waiting inside, and I am okay. More than okay. I am saved.